The stars hung silent in the black sea of space while Rick's ship drifted toward the forgotten wreck that used to be his old cargo hauler. Once upon a time the vessel had a name and a full crew and a purpose, but now it was nothing more than broken metal floating near a dead moon, far from any patrol routes or beacon lanes. Rick sat in the cockpit of his newer, smaller ship, hands steady on the controls, eyes fixed on the twisted remains ahead. There was no light coming from the wreck, no signals, no sound, no warmth. It looked like a corpse left to freeze in the void, and that was exactly what Rick needed. He didn't come here for memories or closure or ghosts. He came because the backup navigation core in that old ship still worked, or so he hoped. He needed it for his current ship, which was falling apart piece by piece, and without a proper nav system, he wasn't going anywhere. In fact, he was lucky he even made it this far. The core was just one deck below the main flight cabin, tucked into the side panel of the engineering bay. He remembered the exact layout, every hallway, every access point, every blind corner. Docking clamps groaned as he aligned with the broken hull, his ship locking into place with a hiss of pressure. Seals. He stood up, grabbed a torch and his toolkit, and moved through the airlock. The passage between the ships filled with the stale smell of old wires and dust. The temperature dropped as he stepped into the wreck, cold enough to make his breath. Fog in the beam of the torch. Everything was just as he left it. Rusted panels, torn floor plating, wires hanging from the ceiling like the guts of a dead animal. The silence pressed in on him. He made his way carefully down the corridor, stepping over broken crates and shattered glass, his boots echoing in the empty halls. This ship had once run supply routes between outposts. It had a full crew, engineers, loaders, and a dog named Patch, but the reactor fire had changed everything when the alarms screamed and flames tore through the engineering wing. He barely made it out alive. The others weren't. So lucky he left the ship behind after the damage was done. The cost to repair, it was more than he had left, and no one wanted a burnt-out shell now. Years later here, he was again back inside this graveyard with nothing but cold metal and fading memories. He reached the engineering bay door, which stuck halfway open. The torch flickered as he forced it wider, enough to slip through. Inside, the room was dark as pitch, no power running through the panels, no hum of machines. But something felt wrong, not threatening exactly, but strange. The room was too clean, too touched. Some crates were stacked neatly in the corner. A piece of cloth had been draped over a chair. The air smelled slightly of something unfamiliar, something not mechanical. Rick raised his torch and stepped in, slowly scanning the room. Tools were missing from the racks. Some shelves had been cleared. A panel on the wall was open, wires exposed and tampered with, as if someone had been trying to reroute power from a dying battery. His grip on the torch tightened, and his other hand slid toward the tool on his belt, a simple stun prod, but enough to drop a scavenger or wild animal. He moved quietly toward the back of the room, where a storage locker stood half open. As he neared it, he heard its soft breathing, too light to be a human, too fast and shallow, but clearly alive. He paused, waited, listened. The breath quickened. Whoever was inside knew he was there. Slowly, with one hand, he opened the locker. Inside, crouched low, barely fitting, was a figure, thin limbs wrapped in a tattered silver cloth, large eyes glowing faintly in the torchlight, skin pale like ash. The creature looked at him with fear and something else. Desperation. It didn't speak at first, just stared, breathing fast, frozen in place. Rick didn't move either. The silence stretched out. Then finally the creature spoke in broken, standard voice, shaking. "Please, no hurt. Please, safe here." Rick didn't reply right away. His mind ran through the possibilities: stowaway, scavenger, spy, escapee. The figure didn't seem armed. Didn't seem strong either. Its arm was wrapped in fabric, stained dark like dried blood. Its chest moved with effort, like it had trouble breathing. Rick lowered the torch slightly, not dropping his guard, but not attacking either. The creature flinched at the movement, curling tighter into the locker. "What are you doing here?" he asked, voice low, not angry, just tired of surprises. The creature looked down as if ashamed. "Hiding here, nowhere else. Gone, all gone." Rick exhaled slowly, not sure what to do. He didn't come here to get involved in alien problems. He didn't want enemies chasing him through space. He wanted a navigation core and a quiet exit, but now this refugee, whatever it was, sat in his way, and something about its eyes made him pause. It wasn't just fear, it was pain and loss and loneliness, things he understood too well. "You alone?" he asked. The creature nodded, slow movement, like it hurt too much to do more. "Crew gone dead, fire escape, pod drift. I found this place quiet, safe." Rick shook his head, rubbed a hand over his face. This wasn't what he signed up for, but he couldn't just throw it out into space. Not like that, not injured and hunted, not after seeing that look in its eyes. He stepped back, signaled for it to come out. The creature hesitated, then slowly uncurled its limbs and stepped forward, wobbling as it stood tall, maybe taller than him, but thin and fragile. Like a walking shadow, he motioned toward the wall. "Sit there. Don't move, don't touch anything. I just want my part, then I'll decide what to do with you." The creature obeyed, silently sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall, eyes never leaving him. As he moved to the panel, he needed tools out. Focus narrowed. But even as he worked, a thought pressed in at the back of his mind. If this thing was hiding here, if it was running from something, then maybe that something wasn't far behind, maybe coming right now. And if it found both of them here, things could get very bad very fast. And somewhere deep in the old ship, a sensor light blinked red, unseen. Something was approaching. The air inside the wreck stayed cold and heavy as Rick worked on the panel, hands steady, while tools clicked and wires shifted under his fingers. The light from his torch flickered across the wall, casting long shadows behind him. The alien sat silently against the far side of the room, legs folded back, thin arms wrapped tight around its chest. Every few seconds, its head would tilt slightly, watching Rick without a word or sound. He could feel the creature's gaze, but he said nothing. He didn't want a conversation. He didn't want a guest, and he didn't want trouble. But here he was in a dead ship with something not human sitting close enough to reach him. If it wanted, Rick knew how to deal with machines and scrap, but living things were always more complicated. The panel opened with a soft pop. The wires inside were still intact, though the power lines had been rerouted. Someone had been here working carefully, maybe trying to power a heater or light with whatever battery was left in the ship. Rick didn't look back as he spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "What's your name?" The alien hesitated, then spoke low and rough. "Lyra." Rick didn't answer. He kept working, pulling the navigation core free and setting it gently into a padded case beside him. The job was nearly done, just a few more checks before he could leave. The silence stretched, then the alien spoke again, broken words hard to follow, but full of effort. "I not come for steal. I escape. They hunt me, kill crew. I hide." Rick turned finally, eyes hard. "What crew? Mine dead, all gone. I run, find this ship." Dark, quiet thought. "Safe." Rick stared at her face, pale skin like frost-covered metal, deep lines under her eyes, her body small and bent like she had not eaten in days. He had questions, but none of them would change the truth. She had taken shelter in his wreck and somehow stayed alive. He stood slowly, lifting the case and closing the panel. With a dull thud, his ship was one hallway away, one more door, then freedom, but his boots did not move. Lyra watched him, head tilted again, like a child waiting for permission. Rick looked at her again, the thin arms, the faint tremble in her hands, the dull light in her eyes. "You sick?" he asked. "Yes, red wound, fever, cold. I try fix power, no work." Rick sighed and rubbed a hand over his mouth again. Something was pulling at his thoughts, something heavier than guilt. He wasn't responsible for her, but leaving her here felt wrong, even though he wanted to be anywhere else. He turned back to her and pointed to the hallway. "You walk, or you stay here. Choice is yours. I'm not carrying you." Lyra pushed herself to her feet, slowly, knees shaking, almost falling, but catching herself. Her voice cracked, but she nodded. "I walk." Rick moved ahead, not waiting for her. The corridor was still dark, the floor uneven, metal torn from past damage. Every step echoed through the ship like a warning. They reached the main airlock where his smaller ship waited, docked and sealed. He typed in the code and the door slid open with a hiss. Lyra stepped through, eyes wide at the sudden light, warmth, and quiet hum of working machines. She moved slowly, like someone stepping into a dream. Her hand brushed the wall, Soft surprise on her face, Rick pointed to the back cabin rest. "There, touch nothing if you pass out." "Don't die on my floor," she nodded and walked slowly to the small seat at the corner. Sinking into it with a long breath, Rick sealed the door and returned to the pilot seat, fingers tapping on the console. As systems came online, a sound stopped him, not from inside, but from the external sensor, soft, almost silent, a ping. That should not be there. He froze, checked the monitor, and saw a faint signature, distant, but moving in their direction. No beacons, no ID tags, just a silent drifting object, almost like a scout ship or a hunter drone, something that wanted to stay hidden. Rick swore under his breath. Lyra must have heard, because she looked up, eyes wide. "What is it?" Her voice trembling. "Trouble." He answered nothing more. He pushed the engines into standby and began shutting down every system. One by one, power, lights, heat, life support, everything dropped to low levels to make the ship look empty, dead, just like the wreck outside. He grabbed a small scanner from the side panel and checked again. The signal was growing closer, slowly, like a predator sniffing the dark. Lyra stood now, moving closer, not touching, just near enough to see the screen. "They find me," she said, soft voice full of pain. "I try hide too long. They track heat, body signal." Rick turned to her, face serious. "You brought them here." "They were already coming," she said. "I just ran." Rick didn't shout, didn't move, his voice low but heavy. "You knew this would happen." She looked away, silent. Rick stared at the blank screen. No weapons, no backup, no chance in a straight fight. Just one option: survive. You stay here, stay silent. If they land and search, we hide. If they find us, we run. If they fire, we burn. Rick didn't need to say more. Lyra nodded, fear in her eyes, but also something else: trust, maybe hope, maybe both. Rick hated that feeling. Hope was dangerous. The ship dimmed into shadow systems, humming low like a sleeping beast outside. The stars remained still. The enemy was near. Rick sat in the pilot's seat, back, straight eyes, sharp, heart steady. His hand rested on the emergency power switch. Lyra sat behind him, quiet, watching, waiting. In that silence, Rick remembered a line from a book he read long ago: "When you think the worst is over, that's when it begins." And somehow, he knew this was only the start. The dead silence of space felt heavier, now pressing against the thin metal skin of the small ship. While Rick stared at the flickering sensor, he kept the engines cold, the lights dim, the systems quiet, everything in low power, just enough to keep air cycling and monitors alive. The enemy was still out there, close, not close enough to see, but near enough to taste. He could feel the pressure, like a weight pressing between his shoulders. Lyra sat across from him, curled up in the corner of the ship, her long arms wrapped around her knees, eyes watching him quietly. She did not speak, but her breath was quick and shallow. Her skin looked pale like wax, her body still shaking slightly. Rick didn't look at her, not yet. His focus stayed on the sensor, trying to judge the path of the unknown signal. Whatever it was moving slow and smooth, like it was scanning each direction, carefully, pausing now and then, listening, searching. Rick's jaw tightened as he pulled up the old override codes for the outer hull panels. With a few taps, he activated the ancient noise-canceling mesh installed when the ship was first built. The mesh was weak, but it could absorb some scans, maybe enough to keep them invisible for a while. He could only hope it worked. As well as he remembered, time passed, slow minutes, stretching like hours. The enemy ship drifted closer. Still no signals, no lights, no words, just the cold, creeping tension of something patient and dangerous. Rick remembered this kind of silence from his old days. Running, smuggling routes, before he went clean, before he lost everything. One mistake back then meant being spaced by pirates or picked off by greedy patrols. Now one mistake meant both. He took a deep breath, slow and steady, then looked at Lyra. She was watching him, eyes wide, not blinking. Her voice came soft like wind slipping under a door. "Is it them?" Rick nodded, once short and sharp. She looked down, hands tightening on her knees. "I not want this. I not bring them here. I only wanted to hide." Rick said nothing. He believed her, but that did not make things easier. Belief didn't stop a bullet or fix a ship. He stood slowly, crossed the small cabin, and opened a hidden panel near the floor. Inside were 3 small drones, Flat discs with thin legs and faded paint. He pulled them out one by one, placed them on the table and began to check each unit. Lyra leaned closer. What is that? Rick kept working, his voice low and focused. Old trick, silent eyes. They move, crawl, scan. I see what they see. When he finished checking the last drone, he loaded a fresh battery and activated the signal. The small machines clicked, the life legs, unfolding lights, blinking once then dimming again. He opened the side hatch carefully, only for a moment, just long enough to slide the drones out. They dropped silently, clinging to the hull, then began their slow crawl along the ship's surface, moving toward the old wreck. Outside on his screen, Rick watched as the feed came alive, images flickering in black and white, shadows of metal doors, broken rails, twisted wires, then movement. Something sleek drifted into view, smooth black surface, no markings, no lights, but a shape that did not belong, part of a larger ship sliding past slowly above the wreck, not stopping, not turning, just floating near. Scanning, Lara leaned closer, her face full of dread. That them, she whispered. That is hunter vessel. They search without sound, without light. They find even dead ones. Rick studied the image carefully, trying to read the patterns, the way the ship moved, the way it scanned the hull. This was not a pirate ship, not a standard patrol. This was something made for tracking, something that hunted from the shadows without warning, without mercy. And it was close too. Close. One wrong move and they would be exposed. He had to think fast. He pulled up the interior map of the wreck, still stored in the ship's old memory core. His fingers moved quickly, scanning routes, corridors, deck systems. Most were dead, but a few still had power enough for a distraction. He needed to buy time and maybe make the enemy look the wrong way. He found the old cargo bay, marked as unstable from the fire years ago. With one press he activated a delayed signal to its emergency beacon, just a tiny flicker of power, enough to draw attention, but not give away their true position. Moments later, the drone feed showed the hunter ship pausing above the wreck, shifting, turning slowly, moving toward the far end, away from Rick's dock ship. The bait worked for now. Lyra let out a shaky breath, eyes never leaving the screen. Rick kept watching, not daring to relax, his hands ready to shut everything down again if the enemy returned. They sat like that for a long while, breath, quiet, lights, low, hearts racing. Outside, the black shape moved slowly, scanning, burning hours like minutes, until finally it pulled away, drifting into the dark, until the sensors could no longer track its path. Rick sat back slowly, every muscle aching from tension. His fingers rubbed at his temple. Then he stood cross to the small storage locker and pulled out 2 old packs of water filters, one of the few trade goods he still had. He tossed one to Lyra. She caught it with slow hands, blinking in surprise. Drink it, Rick said, voice flat. Not a gift, just keeping you alive. Lyra nodded, pulled open the pack and drank with slow sips, like each drop mattered. Rick leaned against the wall, eyes closing for a moment. Then Lyra's voice came again, soft, filled with something deeper than fear. Thank you. Rick opened one eye, looked at her without a word. She looked back, eyes full of pain and memory. I had crew, 2 small ship like yours. We ran from them. They found us, burned our ship. My friend gave me last pod. I drift until your ship found me. I not want war, not want pain, just peace. Rick listened, but said nothing. He understood too well what it meant to lose a crew, to lose a family, to drift with nothing left but survival. He sat back in the seat, hands folded in his lap, voice quiet and slow. If they come back, we don't wait. We run, we leave this place, and never look back. Lyra nodded, her eyes brighter, now more steady. Rick turned to the console, fingers tapping systems, waking engines, warming nav systems, syncing the part he came for, finally installed. Now he had something else, more than a ship, more than a mission. Now he had a passenger, a secret, and maybe a reason to fight again. The stars outside remained silent, cold, unblinking, but the hunt was not over, and Rick knew it. Soon they would return. Rick moved through the narrow hallway of his old ship in silence, every step measured and slow, the sound of his boots light against the metal floor. The ship still floated, dead in space, between shadows and cold stars, but it was no longer empty. Now it held risk, now it held an enemy, and soon it would hold fire. Lyra followed behind him, her feet unsteady, her hand pressed against the wall for balance. Her breath shallow and sharp. Her wound had opened again, a faint red stain marking her side, but she made no sound, no cry of pain. She knew silence was her shield now. Rick glanced back once, and she gave him a small nod, weak but clear. She was ready, or at least willing. He reached the maintenance bay and knelt beside an old crate, pulled the lid off. Slow and quiet inside were tools, parts, wires, batteries, half-broken devices, and the one thing he hoped still worked. A short-range stun trap meant for disabling intruders during salvage jobs. He picked it up, tested the charge, still held enough power for a burst, not much but enough to drop one of the hunters. If timed right, the lights were still dim, the system still masked, the ship still playing dead, but Rick knew that would not last forever. The hunter vessel had returned, and this time it was not scanning from a distance. This time it had landed on the far side of the wreck and sent something inside. Not a full team, just a small unit, fast, silent, trained to move through old ships and tight corridors, the kind that could kill before alarms even sounded. Rick and Lyra moved deeper into the wreck, using the old service shafts and broken walkways, places the intruders might not expect. Rick had walked these halls before, back when the ship still lived, when the lights were bright and the air smelled of fuel and coffee. Now everything was dust and rust and memory, but it was still his ship, and that meant he had the advantage. He placed the first trap near the lower hatch, a narrow choke point. One step in the wrong place, and the whole panel would light up. The second trap went above the storage corridor, near the split beam, where the structure had warped during the fire. It was a tight spot, perfect for surprise. He kept one trap with him, held tight in his hand, ready to throw if needed. They waited near the core chamber, the same place where he had found Lyra days ago. The door half open, the air cold, the silence deeper than before. Rick held his breath and listened. Then he heard it, faint metal shifting, weight pressing against the frame of the ship. Someone or something was inside. Lyra's eyes widened, but she stayed still. Rick raised his hand slowly, motioned for her to move behind the panel. She obeyed without a word, crouching low, her eyes sharp despite the pain, her body ready. The first sound was soft, a hiss of a door opening, not from their side, but from the upper deck. Then another. Footfalls, slow, careful, methodical. They were searching, moving like shadows. Rick knew their kind too well. Not pirates, not raiders. These were soldiers trained to clear rooms without leaving a mark. One mistake, and they would both be gone. Then came the snap, a sharp burst of light and sound. The first trap went off, a loud crack echoing through the corridor. Rick jumped up, moved fast toward the noise, his feet silent, his hand gripping the tool from his belt. He reached the hallway just as one of the intruders stumbled backward, armor sparking from the blast. Rick slammed forward, all weight behind the move. His shoulder hit the figure hard, drove them against the wall, metal dented with a sickening crunch. The figure fell silent. Rick grabbed the weapon from its belt, small, compact, deadly. He held it tight, eyes scanning for the next threat, and then he saw them, two more, moving fast down the hallway, rifles raised, armor black and featureless, no insignia, no voice, only movement. Rick ducked low, rolled behind a beam as fire sprayed the wall where he had been. Sparks flying, dust thick in the air. Lyra moved, then swift. Despite her pain, she grabbed a broken pipe from the floor, raised it, and swung hard as one of the soldiers passed. The blow landed against the side of the helmet, enough to knock the attacker off balance. Rick took the chance, leapt from the beam, and slammed the weapon into the second soldier's side. The shot fired at point blank, light flared, and the figure dropped lifeless to the floor. The other soldiers spun around now, weapon aimed at Rick, but Lyra was already there, her hand reaching up, her fingers glowing faint with strange energy. She touched the soldier's neck, and the armor sparked with a sharp burst. The figure convulsed and fell silent, the air filled with smoke, heat, and silence. Once again, Rick stood still for a moment, breath hard, chest burning, eyes wide. He looked at Lyra, who knelt beside the fallen body, her hand still glowing. She looked up at him, eyes tired but calm. "I learned from my crew," she said, quiet. "We used What we had always. Rick nodded and walked forward, checked the hall. No more sound, no more movement, for now they had won the first fight. Barely, but it was not over. He knew more would come. They always did. He pulled Lyra up, helped her stand her legs. Shaky, her arm bleeding again, but she held her head high. They moved back to the dock, ship fast and silent, sealed the door, and powered. Systems again, the nav core now active, the engines warmed, the course set. Rick sat in the pilot seat, hands on the controls. Lyra beside him, her eyes closed for a moment, then opened, calm and clear. They had no firepower, no army, no allies, but they had each other, and they had survived. Rick looked at her and said, "Only one thing, we leave now. We fly fast, far, no stops. Until we find a place where they can't follow." Lyra nodded, her voice steady. "I have coordinates, safe world hidden, few of us wait there." Rick entered the data into the console. The map adjusted, stars shifting, routes changing, time and space bending. Before them, the engines flared with silent fire, and the ship broke from the wreck into open space. Behind them, the wreck drifted once more, silent, broken, haunted by memory and battle. But ahead the stars waited, endless, open, full of danger and maybe something else, hope. The ship raced through the silent dark, its hull humming with quiet power engines, pushing harder than they had in years. Every light dimmed to keep heat signatures low, every system tuned for speed and stealth. Rick sat in the Vrega pilot chair, eyes sharp on the console, hands steady over the controls. His jaw set, his breath slow, the nav core finally working, giving him the path they needed, and behind them nothing but cold stars and fading metal. Lyra sat beside him, her body still weak, her shoulder wrapped in old cloth, her skin pale, but her eyes more alive now than ever before. The pain had not left her, but something stronger had taken hold. She leaned forward, watching the path unfold across the screen. Her fingers tapped lightly on the edge of the console, her voice soft, but certain. "Not far now, just 2 more jumps. Then we reach the world I spoke of, safe place. Hidden place, no patrols, no hunters, only survivors like me." Rick gave a nod, said nothing, but his eyes told her he believed her, and that was enough. The ship rattled once as they dropped into the next system. The jump short but rough, gravity waves slamming against the hull like angry waves in a storm. Rick adjusted the stabilizers with one hand, keeping the ship straight. Then another sound came, not from the engine, but from the sensors. A signal, brief, thin, weak, but familiar. He looked closer, read the data quickly, eyes narrowing. It was the hunter vessel again, not the one from before, not the scout, but something larger, slower, a command ship or a tracker ship. Its signal masked, but not hidden enough. They had been traced across the jump, even with low power, even with silent travel. They had been marked. Lyra saw it too, her breath catching for a moment. Then she looked at Rick without panic, only resolve. They never stop, never give up, always follow, always hunt. Rick stared at the screen, then turned to the controls, his voice flat. "We jump one more time, after that, we run blind. They might follow, but they will not catch us, not if I have anything left to give." He moved quickly, fingers dancing over the controls, setting a short time delay on the core, priming a secondary signal at the edge of the ship's backup systems. The ship had few weapons, but it had something else. It had a reactor that had once nearly destroyed a full crew. It had a damaged energy coil that sparked with unstable pulses, and Rick knew how to turn those flaws into fire. He adjusted the course, slightly shifting the exit vector away from the coordinates, just enough to give them space. Then he activated the pulse timer. Not now, not soon, but just after they jumped far enough away to watch what happened from a distance. Lyra watched in silence, not asking what he was doing, not questioning his methods. She only placed a hand on the edge of the console and waited. Rick looked at her for a moment, then nodded, ready. The ship flared again, light bending, stars stretching until everything vanished in a single pull of time and space, and then silence returned. They had jumped again, far from the wreck, far from the hunter ship, far from anything known, and for a breathless moment there was peace. Rick adjusted the screen, watching the path behind them through long-range scan, and he saw it, the signal, the hunter vessel dropping in behind them, scanning fast, moving faster but too late. The reactor core left behind was already charged, and the moment the ship scanned it, the overload triggered on the screen. A bright white burst filled the view, the flare of unstable energy lighting up the black sky. The enemy ship caught too close, too curious, now nothing more than scattered pieces drifting in space. Rick exhaled, leaned back in the seat, his breath coming steady again. Lara stared at the screen, eyes wide, not in fear, but in awe. Your ship, it destroyed them. Rick gave a half smile. Old Wreck had one last trick left. She nodded slowly, her voice quiet. You are not like the others. Rick shrugged. Just did what I had to do. The ship drifted, now the course straight, the final jump ready, the destination close. Just a few more seconds, and they would reach it. Rick watched as the planet came into view, green surface, thin clouds, wide oceans, and no signs of life. No beacons, no satellites, no enemy, only quiet and safety. Lara leaned closer, eyes soft with memory. This is the place. I told you, here we wait, here we heal. Rick brought the ship down through the atmosphere, watching the systems hold steady, the wings cutting through wind and light, and finally touching down on soft earth grass, bending under the weight of metal, landing legs locking into place, engines cooling until the hum became a whisper. He stood slowly, looked around the cabin, then back at her. She stood as well, her body still hurting, but her steps more sure than before. She reached the hatch, opened it slowly, and took the first breath of real air in what felt like forever. The sky above was soft blue, the trees tall and still, the air full of quiet sound, wind, leaves, and distant water. Rick stepped out behind her, boots crunching on the ground, his eyes scanning the horizon. Nothing moved, no danger, no noise, just open space and clean sky. Lara turned to him, face calm. You can stay here or leave, your path is your own. Rick looked up at the sky, then back at the ship, then at her, and he nodded, slow, quiet, steady. Maybe I'll stay for a while, fix the ship, rest. Think. She smiled, faint, but real. Humans always keep going, always find way to live, to fight, to stand. Rick looked out at the trees and the light, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something return, not strength, not fire, but peace. And as the wind moved gently across the quiet land, Lara said one last thing before she stepped into the trees. Your kind is strange but strong. I was told you were violent, cold, proud, but I see now you are more than that. You protect what matters, even when it costs everything. Rick smiled, eyes on the sky. Yeah, we do. And then he sat on the ramp of the ship and watched the sky turn gold, and for once, he did not feel hunted. He did not feel lost. He felt home. The end.